of Broward County Library's YouTube. So that means we got to start on time so we don't keep our online viewers waiting. Okay, and Lindsay's giving me the signal that we are going. So good evening again to everyone in the room. Good evening to all of you who may be watching us on YouTube. I am Dr. Tamika Hobbs, and I have the privilege of being the Library Regional Manager for the African American Research Library and Cultural Center here in Fort Lauderdale. And we are very proud and excited about the session that we are going to hold this evening that we will be participating in, called Race and Reading, the Evolution of the Black Library in Broward. But let me tell you a little bit about the occasion that brings us together. Tonight is what I call a soft launch for our rebranded signature program. Now, for 11 years, we have had the South Florida Book Festival, but we are doing something new this year, and it's really my goal to help draw more attention to the research library function that we have that involves the humanities. And so we are now operating under the umbrella of the Africana Arts and Humanities Festival. This is going to be our very first one. We have a slate of programs that are going to be happening tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday that is uplifting in part the 50th anniversary of our library system, which we are observing, have been observing these last few months. And our theme for this first festival is Rootedness, a retrospective on 50 years of Black literature and culture, because of course, BCL has a story to tell, American society has a story to tell, but there is a distinct and unique experience for African Americans. Would you agree? Over these past 50 years, I barely am under that 50-year threshold. So I am a 70s baby. I know many of in the room were thriving in the 70s, but I was just getting here about mid-decade. But I know in my own family, there is a very clear demarcation. I am the first in my family to be born after Martin Luther King, after the Civil Rights Movement, after integration. My brother and I are the first generation to have never attended segregated schools. And so as we continue to have these conversations about history and fact and what we can talk about and what we can't, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to uplift the lived experiences of people who lived through the period of segregation and have a story to tell and have had a front row seat at witnessing this transition from in our American society, which has been a very positive one. And that's what we hope to bring to you today. I want to take a moment and just acknowledge and thank the Friends of AARLCC. Our president, Gloria Bailey, is here. Financial Secretary, Karen Smith is here. Karen also happens to be the president of the Friends. We call them the Umbrella Friends, but the Friends of Broward County Libraries, all of the libraries. And it is with their support tonight that we were able to put on this event, and you'll be able to enjoy after we get finished, those of you in the room, not those of you on YouTube, a very nice reception. But thank you both for your ongoing support of AARLCC and of Broward County Libraries. Speaking of Broward County Libraries, I would like to invite to the microphone to give you a welcome, Allison Grubbs, who is the director of Broward County Libraries Division. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you for that warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists, distinguished guests, and fellow lovers of knowledge, welcome to this enlightening panel discussion on the history of Black librarianship. Tonight, we gather to celebrate the remarkable contributions of trailblazers who have shaped the landscape of libraries, education, and cultural preservation. Our esteemed panelists bring a wealth of experience, passion, and expertise. A custodian of stories, Derek Davis, has meticulously unearthed the narratives that weave through the annals of Black librarianship. His research illuminates the struggles, triumphs, and resilience of those who paved the way. Evelyn, Grooms, and Edith Gooden-Thompson. These two remarkable educators have left indelible imprints on the educational fabric of our community. As former presidents of the Friends of the Mizell Library and the Friends of AARLCC, they champion literacy, community engagement, and equitable access to knowledge. And a beacon of dedication, Tanya Simons-Oparah's tenure at the African American Research Library and Cultural Center exemplifies unwavering commitment. Her work transcends mere administration. It embodies a profound belief in the transformative power of libraries. And the visionary architect behind the African American Research Library and Cultural Center, Samuel F. Morrison's legacy reverberates through the very walls of our institution. His vision birthed the sanctuary where history breathes, culture thrives, and voices once silent resonate. Today, we honor the past, celebrate the present, and envision a future where libraries continue to be sanctuaries of knowledge, equity, and empowerment. Let us engage in a spirited dialogue guided by the torchbearers before us as we explore the rich tapestry of Black librarianship. Thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey, and let the conversation begin.
Thank you, Allison. All right, so what I'm going to do next is introduce with a little more detail the speakers who will be with us this evening for this discussion. I would ask that as I call them and complete their biographies that they join us on the stage. The first is Derek Davis. Mr. Davis is a writer, history advocate, presenter, and storyteller who has a successful track record of creating and managing cultural programs and African-centered historical projects in South Florida. Currently, he serves as the manager of Davis Kuumba Arts, LLC. He's the president of the Trailblazers of Broward County, the chairman of the Broward County Historic Preservation Board, an advisory member to the Old Dillard Foundation, a member of the Rock Road Preservation Historical Group in Pompano Beach as well. Although he is actively working on several community projects, he is retired. He formerly curated the exhibits at the Old Dillard Museum. He was head of exhibitions and programs here at the African American Research Library and Cultural Center, and was once the executive director of the Black Archives History Research Center of South Florida. In his early career, he was senior communications specialist at Florida Power and Light Company and a reporter for the Miami Times and the Miami Herald. Please welcome Derek Davis. Next, we have Evelyn Grooms. Yes, that works. Evelyn Grooms, she is a retired entrepreneur with expertise in early childhood education. She has the distinction of both serving as the president of the Friends of the Mizell Library, and was the first president of the Friends of AARLCC. We are absolutely thrilled to have her here this evening, Miss Evelyn Grooms. After her, we also have another former president of the Friends of AARLCC, Ms. Edith Gooden-Thompson. She is a retired educator as well. Welcome, Ms. Gooden-Thompson. And unfortunately, we had planned for Tanya Simons-Oparah to be here, but she has fallen ill and let me know that she would not be able to join us tonight. So she sends her regrets, and we definitely send our well wishes for her recovery on to her. And last but absolutely not least, we have with us Samuel F. Morrison, who is a native of Flagstaff, Arizona, and a veteran of the Air Force. He began his career as a library director in Frostproof, Florida. I know nobody's heard of Live Oak where I'm from. Frostproof is like right behind there. He was the director of their Living and Learning Library Center from 1972 to 1974. And he initially built a library and initiated outreach services for African American and Hispanic migrants in that community. 50 years ago, this year, Sam Morrison became the assistant director of the Broward County Library System, and then served as deputy director between 1976 and 1987. He then left the system to go help with the construction of Chicago Public Library's Harold Washington Library Center, and then became the institution's chief director. Then in 1990, he returned to Broward County as the director of libraries, a position he held until 2003. And as has been mentioned, it was under his leadership that the vision and the money came for the creation of this institution, the African American Research Library. So he is counted as our founder. Mr. Morrison. I want to get comfortable. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. We have some real legends here, and I think there are so many lessons that we can unpack. We have on the stage people who have been responsible for founding, for leading, for driving to the next level, and for stewarding libraries in this community and other communities. And I think this is an occasion where those of us who are attempting to pick up that torch should lean in and listen for the lessons and the directions that these trailblazers have to offer us. So that's one part of what I'm really excited about tonight. Thanks each of you for agreeing to be here with us. The other part is just taking a chronological look at the unique journey of people of African descent when it comes to literacy. And I'll really aim my first comment to you, Ms. Davis, as our resident historian. And that has to do with the fact that I don't think there are any other group of people, certainly in the United States, that have had laws put in place to prevent them from having access to literature. That was the reality of the period of slavery. But even with that, people are familiar with some elements of segregation, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know about it, and when it comes to public accommodations and movie theaters, certainly with schools, but not enough people, I think, appreciate that segregation also extended to libraries. So I wondered if you could start us off and just take us down the road in terms of this, laying some historical context for segregation in libraries and the restrictions to literacy that African Americans have experienced.
Of course, thank you. Because, unlike Tamika, I was born when segregation was the way that school started. So I grew up, my early years of being school were in segregated schools and in Black communities. I did not grow up in Fort Lauderdale, but I was in Miami in our community. And I remember as I was a small child, there was a library in the Overtown area, but it was so far away from our house that you could not get to it. And I can remember an early experience where my parents did take me up to the library, and I was able to check out a book, and it was so far, I never actually got to return that book because we really lived in Liberty City. So to go over town was a trip to my grandmother's house. Then I don't think they were expecting me to try to check out a book, but I checked out the book, and then, when would I get a chance to go back over town to my grandmother's house to get the book there? So there were restrictions. There were books, there was a library. There were not many libraries around. And it was kind of, for me, that was strange because I was growing up and I wanted to be a writer. And anytime you would find something about writing, it would tell you that a library was a gold mine for a writer. And yet, growing up, where was my gold mine? There was no access to the library to be able to get that. And it also reminds me of an African proverb that says, when an elder dies, you've lost a library. And when I think about that, I say, if that's true, then the opposite must be true. The library is like an elder in your community. It's a place where you can go and get that connection to both the history and the culture. Because when we look at elders, we just say, oh, it's an old person go to, but the elders was like a board, and that board of elders for that tribe, they were the ones who went to actually develop the cultural events. They, when you were having something that you were going to celebrate, it was the elders who were responsible for that. The elders were responsible for settling disputes in the community. The elders had many, many jobs. And when you think of it, the library is a place that you can go, especially in the old days when you didn't have internet to go to and a Google search. When you wanted to solve problems, you went to the library and you tried to find that information. So to me, the library is like an elder. And it was an elder that we didn't have much access to when we were young. It was, before I got to really get involved in libraries as a person in the community, is when you get to college, and then you get to that place where you got a real library, you're near it, you can get to it, you can do the study, you can dig into things. So it's beautiful that we now have a library like this in the community, not just a school library. And it's funny that we have libraries. I was looking at a show the other day, what's the show? Abbott Elementary had a story on it this week about a library. And they were talking about this is Black school. They had these books. They had no librarian, and they set up a program so that they could have a librarian to come in there and organize the books and get them straight, and really help to be able to promote the availability of the books in the community. And it was just one part of the story that I did not like the librarian did, and I know librarians have to do this, but one of the teachers got angry because of the restrictions on the library, and one of the restrictions was a 3-book checkout limit. And I said, I can see that for students, but the teacher should not have been limited to a 3-book checkout limit. But it just shows, to me, the library is a very powerful resource. It is your elder in your community. And especially for teachers, they should have, teachers and the people who work with your community, they need that library there for us.
I love what you said. I mean, that's a really powerful statement to talk about your own aspirations as a young man and understanding that the key to your dream was a library, but it was so difficult. Yes. Where is my gold mine? Yes. So that I can cultivate. I mean, that's really powerful. I want to ask the same question of each of the rest of you, starting with Ms. Grooms. Tell me your library story from your youth. Now you should know Ms. Grooms and I bond because we're up from the sticks in North Florida. I'm from Suwannee County. She's from neighboring Columbia County. So it's a rural area as opposed to a more urban area. What was your access to libraries like as a young girl?
Okay, I have my cheat sheet here. Because I would like to share with you who I am, where I came from, and the experiences I had. So my early educational journey began in rural Columbia County, Florida. The county seat, Lake City, is tagged with the slogan, Gateway to Florida, as it is the first city as you enter Florida traveling from Georgia on I-75. The influence of race as it relates to literacy and reading is twofold, pros and cons. Ironically, I can only think of a few cons, so I will talk about the cons first. First, the schools were separate but unequal in terms of materials. As I recall, the books were secondhand books that white students had used before sending them to the Black schools. There was no science labs, no access to scholarships and/or grants or student loans, only outdoor toilets, wood-burning heaters in each classroom, and during the cold months, the boys had to gather wood for the heaters before the commencement of classes. The pros. Because of these cons, I feel we learned valuable life lessons that aided in a successful life. Springville, and I have my notebook here, and took a lot of the documents out because it wasn't really relevant to what we were talking about. But because of the cons, I feel we learned valuable life lessons that aided in our successful life. Springville was a part of the rural Rosenwald school program that started in the early 1900s. I estimate that Springville was built in the early 1930s. The Springville facility and approximately 5,000 other structures built throughout the South for African American children were made possible through a partnership with Julius Rosenwald, the CEO of Sears, Roebuck and Company, and Booker T. Washington, the president of Tuskegee Institute. My early formal educational journey began at Springville Junior High School, which included 1st through 10th grades. The structure contained at least 6 classrooms. It was an auditorium and a library. The lunchroom, not part of the Rosenwald school program, was built later. The lunchroom facility, which had a full commercial kitchen, was also used as a classroom, really home economics. Upon the consolidation of 2 other schools in the area, the library and auditorium were used as classrooms. So that took care of our library. However, the auditorium was also a place where music appreciation took place twice a week, as well as holidays, end of the year plays and programs, General Assembly, as well as PTA were held there. Upon losing the library as to a classroom, books from the library were then kept in each classroom in what is identified as the coat room, a cloak room, we called it. Our core early learning classes consisted of reading, writing, and arithmetic. In later grades, English, science, biology, and electives such as home economics for boys and girls were added. Also, 4-H, Girl and Boy Scouts, New Homemakers of America were organizations of which you were expected to participate. Because the school had an auditorium, it was considered a community school where various meetings were held that were of interest to the residents in the community. Daily unnatural activities associated with the agrarian experience automatically, indirectly prepared me for reading and writing. Walking on logs that stretched across a stream or a brook. Picking up pecans and peanuts from the ground. The fingers that you used to pick them up were the fingers that you held the pencil with, so that was strengthening your muscles. Shelling field peas. Playing ring plays, such as Jolly is the Miller, who gave us gender identification and right and left. Punchinella gave us balance. Little Sally Walker, spatial relations. Plaiting the maypole was a skill in cooperative play that was a preparation for reading, writing, and teamwork. Many skills were obtained by rote learning. The timetables were on the back of your composition books, of which you had to recite from memory. Vowels and consonants and parts of the sentence were learned from memory by a certain grade. Springville, and I'm proud to say, has a rich history of young, well-trained, energetic teachers who had our best interest at heart. The school was also known for its strong competitive sports program for girls. Basketball, volleyball, and softball, horseshoes, rope jumping, all of those things contributed to the continuity of reading and writing. The school was, okay, although Although the boys participated in sports, they were not as strong, as the boys often stayed home to work in the fields, to do farm work.
You painted a very clear picture for us of,
I'm
I
sorry.
said you painted a very clear picture for us of your school in Springville. And so I take it, what I heard you say though, there was no library in your school. And in terms of the formal way that we know it to be organized in a single room.
There was a room designated for the library, but when the other communities consolidated into that school, it brought more children in. So we had to use the library for a classroom.
And then the books were out, but those were secondhand books handed down.
Yes.
And then, so the exposure that you had, the access that you had to books was related to your school. What about public libraries in your community for Black people during that time?
We were out in the woods. There was nothing out there but homes. I brought my book with the names of all of the people who lived in that area. It was a big community. It had 3 churches, 2 Baptists and 1 Methodist. So, you know, there were a lot of people there. But over the years, they died out. And of course, the school is not there any longer. It's a community center there. But it was a thriving community. And we had very innovative, visionary parents who really, I mean, they had a very, they didn't go any higher than maybe the 6th grade, but they knew that they needed to do for their children to do better than they did. In fact, our church raised funds each year for Florida Memorial. And we sent funds there, the little nickels and dimes and quarters collected, we sent it to Florida Memorial.
So a little bit of history. I happen to know this. Florida Memorial College, now university that's down the street in Miami Gardens, was actually founded in Suwannee
And Live
County and Live Oak, and then went over to Jacksonville, and then St. Augustine would have been its location.
Yes.
And they have a very long tradition called Donation Day, where all of
Yes,
the Baptist churches,
exactly.
I mean, and they would, you said nickels and dimes, that's kind of cleaned up. I've heard stories, and this is Castell Bryant from over in Hamilton County, telling me that the people in her section would load up cans of things but they had canned everything and put it on the back. They would send just food if that's all they had. They would load up and drive it
Now
over.
that you
to
mention
support
it,
the
I do
schools.
recall collecting those canned goods.
So there's and I think all of this, you spoke to it, this example about Donation Day and Florida Memorial. Even the fact that Florida Memorial as a historically Black college was founded 14 years after the abolition of slavery. It was a lot of do for self in these communities. We knew because of that experience that I alluded to previously, that during enslavement, you were banned from learning. It became then, the lesson is that if we are free now and want to stay free, we have to have education by any means necessary. And so that is a very important theme of our history that you've spoken to that I want to uplift. But I'm gonna leave you now, and because I want to hear these other stories as well. I have the same question to you, Ms. Gooden-Thompson. What about your experience with libraries as a youth?
Okay,
You're on.
well, my graduating class, 1964, was the last totally segregated class in Broward County. I was born here in Fort Lauderdale. And so, yes, I've seen a lot of changes throughout the years. Many of you probably wouldn't understand that the city actually ended at State Road 7. That was as far as you could go. And of course, the beaches were always there, but you couldn't go there. There was one little section of the beach that was set aside for the Black people at the time to go to, which is now the area that's north of Pompano. And so, no, and not a lot of people went there because it was far away. So, but as far as schools are concerned, I went to Walker Elementary, And Walker used to be Old Dillard School. And I guess Derek can talk some more about that. But Walker was kindergarten through 6th grade. After that, you went to Dillard High School. Of course, it's had a lot of facial changes and lots of additions to the school that I went to there. But as far as libraries were concerned, Dillard did have a small center that was a library, but none of the books were new. They were all old, frayed, and now that I think about it, a lot of the information was out of date. So we were learning old stuff. Interesting. So beyond that, if you wanted to check out a book, there was a library located at Sunland Park. And if you could, again, none of the books were new. They were all hand-me-downs, and the information was outdated, but it was the best we had. I always like to say that Dillard High School, from the time I went there, had the best and the brightest teachers ever, really. And I guess I am a beneficiary of that. Because leaving there, you were expected to go further. You were taught, it was drilled in you that you had to do your best and you couldn't stop at 12th grade. You had to go and get a degree to better your life, to better your community, and of course, to come back and help your community, which I did. And I guess I'm the better for it. I went through the system and came back, became a principal, retired as a principal. And of course, I've always enjoyed libraries. I've always enjoyed reading. That was my private little thing to do. Get a book and sink down in a couch and just read for hours and hours. That's what I love to do. And so my mother really encouraged that. She had us reading Shakespeare when I was in elementary school. And so when I became an English teacher, of course, Shakespeare is what I taught because it's what I knew and what I enjoyed. But I've always liked to participate in libraries. And when I retired, I ran into Ellen Walters. Ellen Walters was my 4th grade teacher. And she was also the president of the Friends of the Library. And she used to really give me a hard time, but I loved her to death. And so she said, you know, since you're retired, you have all this time. You have to come and join the Friends. And because of Miss Walters and my love for her, I said, oh, okay, I'll come. And that's when we were doing the fundraising to build AARLCC.
So that was the Friends of the Mizell Library.
That was Friends of the
Yes.
Mizell.
And you called Miss Walters' name. I did want to get to her later in the program because I want to talk about some of the shoulders that we stand on, and she definitely is one of those people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Okay. All right. Last but not least, I guess we'll turn it over to our non-Floridian. What was it like for you in Arizona?
Well, I started school in Washington State, and my experience with books and libraries is a little bit different. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. Actually started school in Washington State. Both of those states, even today, have relatively small minority populations. I went to Phoenix when I was in my beginning of the 3rd grade. I don't really remember anything about my 1st and 2nd grade in Hanford, Washington, which was a place where they had the atomic energy program was started. And my father was following those kind of jobs. But in Phoenix, the schools were not desegregated until 1964. I graduated in 1953 from Compton High School in Compton, California. But like Edith, I'm a reader and always been a reader and have always associated books and reading and libraries. And at one time, I thought of myself as a builder of libraries because I loved books so much. I was fortunate enough to have books in my home as a kid and worked in the school library, probably in the 4th and 5th grade, where one of my jobs was to select book covers and display them for the kids to see. I worked in the college library in Compton, also worked in libraries in Morocco. I spent 3 years in Morocco in the Air Force. And as an off-duty job, I ran the base library. When I got out of Morocco and came back and started to finish my college career, after getting my AA, I decided to, like Edith, that I was going to be an English major. I wasn't thinking about teaching, but I loved English and I loved reading. So I applied to a couple of library schools and to UCLA in English. And fortunately, I was selected. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to the University of Illinois in Champaign. And thus my story begins. During the spring break of my master's program, I was traveling around to different libraries, interviewing for jobs. While I was traveling to one of those cities, I got a call from my library school, and they asked me if I would be interested in the interview. And I said, well, if they're going to pay my way, yes, wherever it is. And as it turned out, the interview was in Frostproof, Florida. I don't know how many of you people in the audience and on TV know of Frostproof, but it's in the heart of citrus growing counties in Florida. And the State Library of Florida had partnered with the Coca-Cola Foods Division to strengthen the local community of fruit pickers, the workers. The workers had decided that what they wanted Coca-Cola to do was to build a library for their kids. And that was the job that I interviewed for. I remember very clearly the interview for that job because this was a big city, Sam Morrison from Los Angeles, out in the middle of the orange grove. If you know, Frostproof is, the nearest town is maybe 10, 11 miles away, Avon Park. But there are a large number of migrant workers in the area. And when I finished my interview, I told them that I thought I could do this job in 2 years, in 3 years, and if I was lucky, I could do it in 2. But fortunately, I was able to build the Living Learning Library Center from a Quonset hut and no employees and no books to the facility that ended up serving that area for about 2.5 years before I had the opportunity to come to Broward County as the assistant director. But there's some story of my life in books is that I love books and I love libraries. I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to participate in the building of several libraries. The African American Research Library and Cultural Center, which is my heart. The Broward County Main Library, the Nova Southeastern University Library, the Harold Washington Library in Chicago have formed really the backbone of my professional life.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for your service and the manifestation of your love for books and libraries. I want to pivot there and kind of bring us back to, all of this is coming back to AARLCC where we are right now. But before AARLCC, here in this community, there was the Mizell Library. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Davis, if you could start us off by telling us what you know of the history of the Mizell Library, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what it was like. On the screens, we should have rotating images from our special collections, images that have been digitized that show people in what was the Mizell Library. So that's what's on your screen. But yes, Mr. Davis.
And when I'm starting, I know Mr. Gooding mentioned that. Oh, I'm sorry. That when we say the Mizell Library, we actually have to look back to the school library that formed for Walk Elementary or Dillard at that time. I know we usually started the Mizell Library, but that was just the one that happened immediately before this one. When you look at the community, and I said, there's not just, with history, a lot of times it's just not one thing that creates something, it's several things that create it. So I like to even mention that when you look at some of the earlier news reports, there were community members, the Negro Chamber of Commerce, who had been going to the city for many, many years since the 1940s, that were asking for services for the Black community, including a library. They did not get it, and there are, I think Miss Pappy mentions that her brother went to the library, couldn't get anything, and saw that there was a need for it, and then got her other brother, Ivory, to start a collection of books at the Dixie Court housing project. And we also hear from others how one of the students who had just graduated from the school, I'm talking about at that time would have been Dillard High School, or Dillard Elementary School really, was given a job at the housing project and developed the library there at the housing project in 1951.
Mary Lou Barner?
Mary Lou Bonner.
I'm looking at the
Yes.
history that you wrote, that you let me borrow. Thank you.
Yes, Mary Lou Bonner started, and later she was trained by the city's library how to organize the books. And from learning how to organize the books there, they mentioned Sunland, that she moved from the housing project manager's office to Sunland Park. And Sunland Park then moved from there to a library that was also on Sistrunk at about 11th. There was a library building there for a while. And then that library became the library on 14th Avenue. So it was on 11th Avenue. So it was on 4th Street. It was on wherever street
Sunland Park.
Sunland Park is, which is what, 19th
No,
No.
like 15.
15th. It was on 11th Avenue on 6th Trunk. Then it went to 14th. And at that point, I think is when they actually had the name change, or the community selected name Avandi Mizell, going back to some of that early history of him involved and, influencing that first library being started. So the history of the library actually goes back to me all the way to the beginning, because they were always trying to get the services of the library. We're struggling to have a library, and then found out that if you want to do it, we'd have to do it ourselves. So they started their own type of library at that housing project, the Dixie Court housing projects. And then that led to the city coming in, because the housing projects was actually a city facility. And so the history of the library, the name that is most usually known is the Mizell, when it actually went into the building on 14th, and they actually give the Mizell. But the history goes way back as far as the history of where these books just kept gathering and expanding to become the African American Research Library. And I'd like to point out that it's something else that a couple of people said, where they say they love books and they're going to books. Many times they were going to other sources other than public libraries for these books. You mentioned that, maybe your mother collected books, or somebody you knew collected books, or I can remember our church had books that you would go to and get books from the church. So it was somehow you'd find people who either love books or something. Like I said, when I learned that books are your gold mine, you have to look for all these spotted gold mines all over the place to get the information. So it's beautiful when you get someone who actually puts a library and organize it so you can be able to find things. Because that's one of the greatest things libraries do, is they make it easier for you to find the information that you want to get. So the history of Mizell Library and this library goes back, I think, all the way to the beginning, when the community was fighting, saying, hey, we want a resource like this in our community.
And I think it's important to point out what you're painting a picture of is number one, there's always this impulse for knowledge and for access to books, and it's by any means necessary. We will do it ourselves. We will do it wherever we can. But the other piece of this is demanding the use of your tax dollars, essentially the tax dollars that these Black citizens were paying to come in and enrich their communities, being denied, but still continuing to do the work. And again, it's so important that we have these conversations and perspectives, because that is not a world that I grew up in, right? When we take access to libraries for granted, it's important to recognize that there's been a real journey. And especially when we talk about today, when we get into conversations about book banning and who should have access, it's a very slippery slope. It's a very sensitive thing. I do want to let folks know that are with us, maybe watching on YouTube, that you have the ability to chime in, I think, with questions. So do let us know if you have any questions tonight that we can put to the panelists. Same thing for folks in the room. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, please percolate on those. I'll be asking for those in a bit. I'd like to come back to Ms. Grooms and Ms. Gooden-Thompson and get you to talk about your experiences with Mizell Library. Even you, Sam, Mr. Morrison. What was the Mizell Library like? What are your memories from that institution? Could you describe those things for us? Let's do it differently. We'll start with Mr. Morrison, and then we'll come down this way.
In 1974, when I came to Fort Lauderdale as the assistant director for the Broward County Library system, the Mizell Library was one of the 3 libraries the city of Fort Lauderdale operated. Fort Lauderdale Library on Sunrise Boulevard, the Riverland Library, and the Mizell Library on Sistrunk. So the city was operating those 3 libraries, and the city of Hollywood had its library. In Broward County, through the efforts of a number of citizens, decided they wanted to provide service to all the citizens of Broward County. prior to that, and even today to some extent, uh, various cities operated their libraries. And if you didn't live in that city, you had to pay a fee to use that library. But in any case, in 1974, the Broward County Commission decided to open the Mizell, the Fort Lauderdale, the Riverland, and the Hollywood libraries to anybody who lived in the county. And from that point, the library system grew to its current 37, 38, or 39 libraries. And I remember Mrs. Walters and the Friends of the Library and their concern and interest in expanding library services beyond the Mizell Library. And it was their input, the Friends, led by Mrs. Walters at that time and followed by the two ladies on the podium with me, were the spark plugs to encourage people to make this building that we're sitting in possible. So I guess this is my opportunity to publicly thank Mrs. Grooms and Edith for their efforts to make this library possible.
That deserves a round of applause. We thank you. So Ms. Edith, what are your memories of the Mizell Library? And maybe this is a good time for you to tell us a little bit more about Ms. Walters, because I'm curious, when you said she gave you a time, that speaks to me about personality. Tell us about her personality and the work
Oh,
that you
she was a
observed.
dynamo. And she had that kind of charisma where you couldn't say no to her. Whatever she asked you to do, it was yes, ma'am. So I just have that reverence for her, not only because I think she was instrumental in my early life, and it sort of did a circle and came back to the same respect that she had. Not only that, she was in the same graduating class as my mom, so she knew my mother.
Different level.
And so, yes, I had a lot of reverence for her, and she had a vision of what she had talked about, I guess, with Sam. And she was collecting people to help with fundraising. That's how I got involved, fundraising to build this library. Now,
She didn't help, she led that fundraising effort. Absolutely.
and all of her
Ellen
friends.
Walters led the effort, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So as far as Mizell Library is concerned, it was a very small building on 11th Avenue, 11th Terrace. No, 14th. 14, no. Yeah. Oh, that's 12th Avenue. Okay. At any rate, as a kid, I lived on 10th Avenue, so I could just walk there, and it was very close. It was very, very small. I don't know if any of you have ever gone back to your old elementary school, and somehow it seems so small. And that's the kind of vision I had going back to it after I'd gone away to college and came back, and I went, wow. Not only was it small, but they did have a good collection of encyclopedias. For those of you who remember, we used to have those.
Before Google, there was
Before Google,
encyclopedias.
we had encyclopedias, several different ones, and dictionaries, and lots of children's books. But there wasn't much beyond that as far as doing research is concerned. And so I can understand the community wanting to have more that they could access that would help them along in their education or just their research. It wasn't there. And so when AARLCC came along as a research library, and I said, oh, heck yeah, put me down. I will help with that because I do have a healthy appreciation for research and for information. So,
Tell me just one other question related to that library. What was the feeling in the neighborhood about the library? Was the library sought out? Was it a popular place, would you say, when we talk about this earlier iteration of the Mizell Library?
yes, because it was a two-story building. The library was on the top floor, and underneath were little offices and community resources. And so the children went there quite frequently. I mean, and they had a good program too for kids, especially in the summer. The summer programs were really, really frequented quite a bit. Between Sunland Park and the Mizell Library, they were the heart of the community, really. I can remember in the summertime, Sunland Park used to have these teenage nights where they would have a DJ come in and you can do the twist. So they took care of the older kids, but Mizell has always been friendly with the younger ones.
Okay, thank you for that.
And may I just interject a bit, because we don't have Tanya here, and she was, I think, with the what do you call it? She was an outreach officer for person for the Mizell Library, and they developed a lot of programs. I can't remember the name of it now. Sam, you remember the name of the program they had, which was an outreach program? Library in Action. Yes, I'm sorry. Which did a lot of things to invite the community to things there. Before, when I came to actually work for this library, it was still at Mizell, and I took over the program there and saw some of the programs that they had at that library before I came. There were all type of great speakers, there were artists, there were all types of things that happened in the auditorium that was on the second floor of that library. So it was a great community resource. I heard about it when I was down in Miami. You would hear about things that were happening up at the library, at the Mizell Library. So it wasn't just books at the Mizell Library. It had a great outreach program to take books out into the community, to do events. From my understanding, it was one of the major forces behind starting the Sistrunk Festival. And was like had their, outside that library, they would have a place where when they had the Sistrunk Festival, that people could come and interact. So I wish Tanya here, what you could tell you more about that Library of Action program and some other programming, but it was a great community resource.
That piqued my interest as I was preparing for tonight, to be able to learn a little bit more, because what you said, Mr. Morrison, and what I recall from her biography is that these are not just static places, that there is a level of activism that comes into play when you talk about library leadership in our communities, that there was greater need, that there were sometimes, as you've attested to, greater hurdles to overcome, even to get the resources in, to get the buildings that you needed. And that's really impressive to me, because I think that's something to call out and identify, because that's part of the legacy that we are inheriting here at AARLCC, and we need to be cognizant of that. We need to make sure that we're clear about it and that we continue to light that path. Thank you for that, Ms. Davis. I want to come to you, Ms. Evelyn. Your memories of Mizell Library. When did you start to get involved? What do you remember about that time?
I became involved through my sister-in-law, Juanita Phillips. She was the treasurer, and she became ill, and I would come and take her to the meetings, and I would stay, of course, with her. And while I was there, Ellen, being the personality she was, of course, And of course, I knew Ellen because she was a good friend to my sister-in-law. And that's how I started getting involved. And I became a member. And of course, new members are always asked to do stuff. And of course, I was asked to chair the awards event. And it started that way. Then after I had the, I guess, success in doing the awards events, Ellen had been the president for 18 years. And they passed it on to me. And that's how I became president. I was president when we came into AARLCC. But Ellen was a person of influence. And I imagine that's why Sam asked her to head the fundraising program. And she was very instrumental in helping me to help and guide me when I became president. I had never been president of a group like this before, and she helped me tremendously, along with Maud Storr and some others. And I just want to go back to the Friends. There was a Friends of the Sunland Library prior to Friends of the Mizell Library.
Okay. Didn't know that.
Of which, this is according to the source I have here, of which Charles B. Morton was the president of that Friends group. And of course, then Ethel Pappy organized the Friends of the Mizell group. And she was the first president of the Friends of the Mizell group. And that's according to the source I have. You might want to fact check this.
There's been a lot of fact
And I'm
checking
just
going
going
on
by
as we
the
prepare for this.
information that I have.
But that's what's good for us to get together and tell these stories, especially, I mean, I've been in this community for a little more than a year and trying to grasp all this history. This is absolutely fascinating. Thank you for uplifting that. I want to invite any questions. I don't know if anybody in the room has questions. I don't know if we have any questions coming in online. Just raise your hand and we'll bring the mic over and let you know any questions. All right. You do have one? Okay.
Good evening. So one of our Facebook viewers asked, they heard Mr. Derrick say he did not return the book. So they wanted to know what each of your favorite childhood books were. So it could be childhood to teenage years.
Great question. Wow. You have memories of your favorite childhood book?
Wind in the Willows.
Wind in the Willows?
Unfortunately, to really show myself, some of my first childhood books were comic books. But because talking about having collections, my brothers and I collected a lot of comic books. There was a pantry. We lived in the Scott Projects, and there was a pantry where you're supposed to have food, and we had it filled with comic books. I mean, you know, of course, our mother, when we were moving from there, she decided that that was not a good reading source, so she threw them away. But we had like the original Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four. It'd have been a great collection. But also included in there, because we like reading so much, there was a publishing company called Classic Comics, and Classic Comics did all the classics. So I read Frankenstein, Call It a While. I can't remember how many books we've read in comic format of the classics in this thing called Classic Comics. So my first introduction to many of the classics weren't the actual real books. They were the comic books that were about those classics. And I used to like the it's surprising how much, when you're even reading comic books, in those days, many of the comic books, they would have scientific concepts in the plot or the characters. So you would get interested in things like science and things like that from the comic, from the storyline of comics, especially if you read like the Batman and the other type of detective comics. There were things that you were learning about science, about animals, about insects, all kind of things were from comic books. So yeah, I just want to say, I thought comic books, even though, the parents going to say it was, it was like somebody was going to rot your brain out. There was a resource for learning even in those comic things.
My team has accused me of being a comic snob. So my son loves manga. So that has been something that has kept him, when he comes here, I lose him because he's upstairs with Trey Fitzpatrick, getting the latest manga. And I tend to also judge it a little bit, but I'm a reconsider. You continuing to make me go back to the drawing board on that. Miss Evelyn, Miss Edith, any favorite books from your childhood?
The first favorite books? Oh, well, I guess it were the books that we had in school, number one, because we were out on the farm. We were very poor. We didn't know we were poor, but we were poor. And books, that was a luxury. But we had, we all went to church. We went to Sunday school. And of course, we had the Sunday school lessons, books, the lessons that we taught from Sunday school. And we always got the New Testament of the Bible. My aunt lived on premises. I don't know whether anybody understands what that is or not, but she was on premises. That means she lived with the white family she worked with. They had children, and they would bring the books that they had to us, along with hand-me-down clothes and shoes and everything else. So we were exposed to books. And I don't know, I guess any of them were my favorite books because I did love to read. And I did learn to read early because I had like sisters and brothers before me. And of course, you learn a lot of things from them. You learn to read early from just being around them. And so, yes, we had books, but definitely we had the Bible and the Sunday school books.
Miss Edith, how would you respond to that question?
Well, my father was a Pentecostal pastor. And of course, when she says the Bible, that's what we read in that house from morning to night. And yes, you did learn to read early because you had to read out loud.
Yes, you did.
To them. And but if I had my choice, I would think there's one little book that I went and sought it out when my daughter was born. The Little Train That Could. I think I can. I have, and she still has that book. So
So you managed to pass down your love for that book to your daughter.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Any questions in the room? Commissioner, thank you for being here. Everyone, Commissioner McKenzie for our district here. Want to recognize him? Thank you, sir. Yes. Let's get you a microphone. Did I take the floating mic? I did.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for the hostilities that you have endured and for showing us how to thrive through those hostilities. I'm trying to understand this statement that the library system expanded. I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Mr. Morrison, could you explain a little bit more?
In 1974, Broward County Commission decided to open their libraries to everyone in Broward County. After that time, not each of the cities, but at that time, there are 29 cities in Broward County. And since the cities that operated libraries were taxing their citizens, the elected officials looking for opportunities to cut their budgets would often decide to give their library to the county. So the city of Hallandale, the city of Pompano Beach, the city of Coral Springs, half of those 29 cities over time decided to contract with Broward County to operate those former city libraries. So we grew from the 3 original Fort Lauderdale city libraries and the city of Hollywood libraries by adding libraries from each of the various cities. Oakland Park never joined the county system. Parkland never joined the county system. But I'm trying to think, there's one other city that didn't join the system. But one of my jobs as the assistant director of the county system was to meet with the local city elected officials and help work out the contract. And we had to, the county had to take over the pension obligations of those cities for their employees and all of that kind of thing. But there were 2 bond issues that resulted in what is now the 37, 39 libraries in Broward County. 19 bond issue in 1990 and one in 78, I think it was. Those 2 bond issues resulted in libraries being built with county tax funds throughout the city. The main library downtown was one of them. The North Regional Library out by Coconut Creek, the South Regional Library in Hollywood, several other libraries. And I do want to mention earlier you mentioned Library in Action. When I came in 1974, we only had the Mizell Library in the county system. I think Pompano may have had a library at that time and operating as a city library. But I was aware of a guy named Tyrone Bryant from New York City who was known for providing services to minorities in New York City. And I was able to hire him from New York City, and subsequently his friend and partner, Tanya Simons-Oparah, both came to Broward County, and they were the spark plugs who created what was called Library in Action. Those were the first physical libraries in Broward County in Black communities. I know it's a long story, but
Yeah, I was, thank you for bringing, he was Tyrone Bryant, who has a library branch named after him now. That was another part, another name that I wanted to invoke tonight to get a little bit of history. And I learned through talking to Tanya that she had come down with him as well. Very, very powerful.
Excuse me.
Yes.
one of the things I've been fortunate enough to do over time was to steal great people to come down and be part of the Broward County Library system. The guy sitting over there, I stole him from Miami.
I heard you can't go back to Miami because of that. Many, many years later. So, yes, yeah, those are really important names to know, stories to know. Thank you very much for that. There was another question. Yes. Hey, David.
Hi, good evening. thank you all so much for your presentation and just being the pioneers that you are. And I also want to, and she probably won't remember, thank Mrs. Gooden-Thompson. My name is David Bynes, and so in 1998, when you were the principal at New River Middle School, you hired me as an interim sub, and so you are responsible for me now being an instructor and a director at Florida International University, and so thank you so much for that. And to Mr. Davis, I had the pleasure of sitting on a panel about a year ago, an emancipation panel at, I think, Caribbean Island, the museum, and so Island Space. So thank you again. My question is, obviously, the library seemingly historically has served as a major social and cultural impact. But I'm also wondering, and sitting with the question, does the library have a political and even economic impact or significance for a community? And if so, if you all can talk a little bit about what that may have looked like over your time and how that has expanded.
Anybody want to tackle that question? Looking at the economic and social impact of libraries.
Well, I think we have seen it in action here this year, since the library has been a beacon for information and ideas, especially in view of the political climate that has blossomed here of late, and of accusing libraries of pushing woke agendas, et cetera, et cetera. And the program that is being offered on Saturdays, I think, is just an antithesis to that. And I think that's the job of libraries, to offer information so that we don't lose our history.
And I think something that people overlook in libraries is, just like a library is a collection of information from a variety of sources. Library programs are actually a collection of information from various disciplines. That is where, people always say how much I know about Broward County, but remember, I came to Broward County, I didn't know a lot about Broward County. So most I learned from Broward County was from the programs that we were having in Broward County. I did know a little bit because before I was here, I was with the Black Archives, and the Black Archives did have the links book from up here that talked about some of them. And sometimes people come do research, and it was like that link book we were telling them about, they could get to know about the legacy of the people in Broward County. But most of what I know about the history, about culture, is from attending programs or meeting people. And the reason I say it is like cross-discipline. Through the library, you meet the artists, you meet the scholars, you meet the financial experts. It's just name a topic, and you will find through the libraries and these programs how you can get access to that. To me, it's not just, the books are great. And sometimes when you're talking to these people, librarians try to push that book list to you so you can know more about, find even more. If you get to some program, you get interested in it, the librarians can help you get that book list. Someone mentioned earlier about encyclopedias. Because I remember when I was young, that was like a great source of information. If you could find even one encyclopedia. I know our family had one, it was like an old Britannica issue of encyclopedias. And I later learned that was one of the greatest Britannicas out. The ones we had was old and crumbly, but we did have that. And when I would go to get research, almost anything I would want to find out, you can go to that old Britannica and you can get that. And then when I got to college and took a class in library science, because in school, they always teach you, they had always said, don't use an encyclopedia as your reference. Do not use an encyclopedia as your reference book. And it was in college until I found out, when I got in library science, that every article in an encyclopedia is written by someone. And every encyclopedia has information about the people who wrote the articles in it. And the best place to start any type of research is encyclopedia. You look at several of them, and when you go get the encyclopedia to find out, because each encyclopedia is kind of different. All encyclopedias are not the same. Some might be more into science, some may be more into history. Once you find the encyclopedia that you like the best, go find out who wrote it, because there's some kind of mark in the encyclopedia to tell you who wrote that book. And did you know you can actually go to an encyclopedia, look up that person's name, find his reference books, and put them as your reference?
You sound like my student when I was teaching. Okay.
And you can go to that person's other books. If you like what he said about that, go and help the librarian find the book where that person wrote about it. So even though, the teacher's telling you don't use the encyclopedia as your reference, it didn't say don't use the encyclopedia as your source of getting an understanding, because the encyclopedia usually condenses a subject down to a simple level that you can understand it. And if you look at several encyclopedias on that same topic, you'll find out, oh yeah, I like the way this one is pointing. I'm going to search who wrote that in this encyclopedia, look at what some of the books they have, and I'm going to use them as part of my research reference.
So I think that that point though that you made about the intersection that we are, the fact that there are so many different types of people, so many different types of knowledge, not always books. And that's the other important part, is that not everyone is not going to use the books, but having programs that also serve people. And I think that's part of, to answer the question, the legacy is that we're still a place where people can come and learn and not have to open their wallet or swipe their credit card. And it's through organizations like the Friends. We have 2 former presidents of Friends. We have a president of the Friend in the audience. That's what they do, is help to raise the funds. It takes money. We get money, of course, through the county and the commission that maintains the building and the salaries, but to go the extra distance, to be able to offer Black history classes as an antidote to some of the craziness, we need additional money to make that happen. And so that's how all of this is able to continue. This is about the time that we wanted to conclude the session. I have to, though, we have not covered some really critical ground, and it's a ball of wax. There's food waiting for us, so I'm gonna let my panelists know that. But I would like to have you speak to this transition from the Mizell Library, Mr. Morrison, to the idea for this institution, the African American Research Library and Cultural Center that opened 21 years ago.
One of my jobs as the assistant director was to go to the various cities and encourage them to turn their libraries over to the county. But the county was also looking for sites for some of their, to build libraries. And I was responsible for helping to determine for the location of the main library downtown as part of the 1978 or 79 bond issue. One of the proposed sites was located in what's almost the heart of the Black community in Broward County, I-95 in Broward. There's a site there. That was the site that I was suggesting. The forces that be decided, remember the library opened in 1984, the main library downtown. So Broward grew from 1974 to 1984 from a population of around maybe 600,000 in 74. Not sure. Do you know, Commissioner, what that population was? Okay. Anyway, Broward County had 2 bond issues during my term as the director. And unfortunately, the bond issue didn't build libraries in predominantly Black communities. And that was one of my jobs, finding sites for libraries. In 1979, in April, I left Broward County, went to Chicago to be the chief librarian for the city of Chicago. And I left with the feeling that in spite of the time I had spent as the director of the county library system, I really hadn't done my job because I hadn't been successful in having libraries placed in our communities, the community I lived in. I said to myself, if I ever had the opportunity, I would come back to Broward and build a library in our community. I served as the chief librarian in Chicago for about 2.5 years. And my former boss, the director of the county library system at that time, got kicked upstairs. He invited me to come back to Broward to be the director of the county library system. I came back in January of 1990 as the director of the county library system. And I had in mind a mission that was to see that a library was built in our community using local tax dollars. Remember, I mentioned Library in Action. Those were federal dollars used to build those libraries, not local tax dollars. So I came back with the mission to build a library in our community. At that time, the county was planning to build a library over on 27th near Sistrunk. I'm not sure if that what the property was, but in any case, I met with my supervisor and suggested that the 20,000 square foot library they were planning to build at that site on 27th Avenue was insufficient. And they said, well, what do you propose? And I said, well, I'd seen the library in Atlanta, the library in New York that this library is modeled after. And I said, what we need to do is build a 60,000 square foot facility. Bottom line is they said, well, you're so smart, we'll give you the land and we'll give you $14,000. That wasn't enough. So I asked Ms. Walters to help me raise the money. As a staff person, I wrote grants and raised some of the money through grants from endowments and so forth. But Mrs. Walters established community fundraising operation. She involved churches and organizations. She had like 14 different committees that raised close to $4 million for this facility through her committee people. And I mean, she's a marvelous lady, a very smart lady, and she helped to raise the money to build this facility. So long story short is through the grants that I was able to write, and the funds I was able to raise through local people like a guy who used to, he's deceased now, but the guy who had his headquarters for Blockbuster, Wayne Heisinger, gave $1 million for this facility. Local elected officials arranged for the state of Florida to contribute dollars for this facility. So it was a joint effort that resulted in the necessary funds to complete my dream and see that a facility currently known as the African American Research Library and Cultural Center was built here on Sistrunk Boulevard, completed my dream. We're sitting here today, and I'm happy to be here. And for those of you who maybe have a plaque or one of the bricks outside to contribute to this facility, I thank you.
Well, Mr. Morrison, again, I wanna thank you for your vision, for your drive. I didn't know that part of your story. It's really wonderful. It's why we should be doing more of this, so that we can learn all of the story and the journey, and really have a deeper appreciation for this building. It is the dream of my life to have the privilege of leading and stewarding this institution. Which would not be possible without you. What I was going to say earlier is I regret that Tanya's not here, because my first program ever coming and experiencing AARLCC was one that she put together, the Pan-African Book Festival. Back in the day, the building was still relatively new, but that's my first association. She was the first staff person that I met.
I wanted to say that it wasn't all cake and ice cream.
It sounds like we need to have a round two and get into it. All right, with that, another round of applause, please, for these wonderful. It is really extraordinary to be able to sit here and listen to you and to appreciate the vision, the stewardship, the knowledge, the research that it's taken to make this community better. I think we all here are lovers of libraries and recognize how important they are to our communities, and the fact that you've spent so many years and so much effort to maintain them, and especially to pour into this place, is something that we all are very grateful for. All right, well, we are going to wrap at this point, but I do want to just remind everybody that this was kind of our soft launch for our festival. I talked about Pan-African Book Festival. We are now in the midst of our Africana Arts and Humanities Festival. And so we have slates of events that will happen tomorrow morning. In this room, we'll have Behinds from the Miami Herald. Again, everything we're doing is really touching on the 1970s. She's going to talk to us about her experiences desegregating the newsroom at the Miami Herald. She'll be in conversation with another very important journalist here in South Florida, Nadege Green. So they'll be here at 10:30 in the morning. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll be in the auditorium where we will be uplifting the legacy of Toni Morrison. Can't talk about literacy and literature in the 1970s and not talk about her. So we are going to watch a little bit of the documentary about her life, The Pieces I Am, and then we're going to have a talk back with some phenomenal scholars, including Dr. Carol Boyce Davies, who will be here with us from Howard University, where she is currently the head of the Department of English. So don't want to miss that. And then Friday, we will be over at the Urban League. We are going to have conversations about the history of the community, but we also want to be taking a look at what's happening now and planning for the future of this community. So we're having a neighborhood revitalization symposium that's going to go on there. We'll start with an opportunity tour of the neighborhoods to see the development, and then we'll come back and there'll be technical discussions. And then we are going to be recognizing one member, entrepreneurial family in this corridor that has been doing some outstanding work for the last 53 years, and that is Bobby Henry Jr. Sr. We're going to recognize him in the West Side Gazette for their 53 years in business, but also announce our digitization project, which we're going to be tackling the digitization of his newspaper to make sure that we are keeping it for the future. The last thing I'll point out, that evening we will have New York Times bestselling author Michael Harriot here in the building. That's at 6. And immediately following, we will have our Destination Roots benefit reception. So that is our only ticketed event. It allows us to make the rest of the event free and open to the public. It's going to be, again, very fittingly, a 1970s disco funk soul party. Everybody's been asking me what to wear. Just make sure it's danceable is all I will say to you. We also will have catering by Swirl Wine Bistro. Very excited to have them here. But take a look at the entire slate of events. There are QR codes all around where you can pull those up. Please do make plans to come back and celebrate with us over the next several years as we, again, uplift the 50th anniversary of this library system. So with that, I think that's everything. All hearts and minds clear. I want to shout out the staff. They've been working really hard. I want to shout out all of the folks who are able to watch us online. Really excited that we have this new capability. We will be live streaming all of our sessions this year, with one exception. And so please, if you're not able to come and be with us physically, please know that you can tap in. All right, let's go enjoy the reception. Thank you again for being here. Please come back. Please come back.
Before we close,
Yes.
I would just like to thank all of you for sharing your evening with us. And I have my family here, my husband and my son and my niece, where's Cheryl. And then we have our county commissioner for this district, Robert McKenzie. Thank you. Thank you for coming, Sherry. Yes.
Thank you.